door closed with a soft click, leaving her alone with the silence. Evelyn stood at the sink, staring at the yard beyond the window. The garden she kept was trim, neat, roses pruned, hedges squared. A perfect picture of suburban steadiness. But she could not shake the feeling that beneath the manicured soil, something wild was trying to push its way out. She poured herself a second cup of coffee and sat at the table. The quiet pressed in around her. She tried to remember the last time she had felt alive. Really alive. Her wedding day. Well, perhaps that trip to the coast years ago, when Daniel had surprised her with a weekend by the sea. The memory warmed her briefly, but even that had been 10 years ago. Since then, work, dinners, polite affection, the kind of intimacy that was more routine than desire. She wasn't unhappy, not exactly. But wasn't life supposed to be more than this? Her phone buzzed, startling her. A message from Margaret, a friend from her book club. Gallery opening tonight. Local artist. Come with me. Evelyn tapped the message, considered saying no. She usually did. Crowds made her restless. Art was something she'd admired from a distance, not something she'd immersed herself in. And yet, her finger hovered over the keyboard. What else would she do tonight? Sit at home, fold laundry, wait for Daniel's return long after dark? I'll come, she typed, surprising herself. She pushed the phone away, heart fluttering. It was a small thing, an evening out, but it felt like the first breath after holding her lungs too long. That afternoon, Evelyn busied herself with chores, but her thoughts kept circling back to the message. What kind of art would she see? What sort of people would be there? She chose her dress carefully that evening, something simple yet flattering, navy blue, with a neckline that hinted without revealing. She left her hair loose around her shoulders. When she caught her reflection, she almost startled. She looked younger somehow, expectant. Margaret picked her up in a cheerful flurry of chatter. You need this, she said as they drove into town. Too much time stuck in that pretty house of yours. You'll love it. Local talent, good wine, maybe even a little music. Evelyn smiled politely, though her nerves hummed. The gallery was alive with conversation, glasses clinking, the scent of paint mingling with perfume. White walls glowed under spotlights, canvases exploding with color. Evelyn walked slowly, letting her eyes roam. Some work she didn't understand, others struck something in her chest, a flash of longing, a memory she couldn't name. Then she saw her. Across the room, a woman stood by a large canvas streaked with crimson and gold. She wore a loose linen shirt smudged with paint, dark hair pulled back in a careless knot, a glass of red wine balanced in her hand. She wasn't like the other guests, dressed in polite dresses and suits. She was raw, alive, the air around her humming with something unspoken. Their eyes met. Just for a moment, but it was enough to send Evelyn's stomach tumbling. The woman's gaze was steady, direct, a spark that seemed to peel back the layers Evelyn wore like armor. She looked away quickly, heat rushing into her cheeks. Margaret tugged at her sleeve. That's Clara Mitchell. She's the talk of the show. People say her work's got fire in it. Clara. Evelyn let the name settle in her chest like a secret. Margaret was pulled away into another conversation, leaving Evelyn alone. She wandered closer to the canvas Clara stood beside, pretending to study it. Bold strokes of red tangled with shadowy blues, the whole piece pulsing with movement. Desire, anger, freedom, it felt alive. You see it, don't you? A voice said. Evelyn turned. Clara stood beside her now, close enough that Evelyn could smell the faint tang of turpentine on her skin. I think so, Evelyn murmured. Clara tilted her head, studying her. Most people just nod and move on. But your eyes lingered. That's rare. Evelyn swallowed, unsure what to say. Her pulse hammered. Clara smiled faintly, as though she knew. Art should stir something. Otherwise, what's the point? Before Evelyn could answer, someone called Clara's name. She touched Evelyn's arm lightly, just fingertips grazing her sleeve. Enjoy the rest of the show, she said, and moved away. The spot where her fingers had brushed burned long after she was gone. That night, Evelyn lay in bed beside Daniel. He was already asleep, his breathing steady. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment in the gallery. Clara's eyes, her voice, the way she seemed to look straight through her. She turned onto her side, closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come. Instead, there was a restlessness deep in her bones, something wild pressing against the neat garden soil of her life, begging to be let through. The morning after the gallery opening, Evelyn moved through her routine as though in a dream. The clink of dishes, the hiss of the kettle, Daniel's rustling newspaper. It was all the same, yet not. Something had shifted. Clara's voice lingered in her mind, low and steady. Art should stir something. Evelyn poured Daniel's coffee, setting it beside his plate. He glanced up, distracted, murmuring a thank you. He had no idea she hadn't slept. No idea that while he dreamed beside her, she had lain awake, remembering the way Clara's eyes had held hers, the warm brush of her fingertips. Are you all right? Daniel asked, finally noticing the shadows beneath her eyes. I'm fine, she said quickly, forcing a smile. Just didn't sleep well. He nodded, satisfied with the explanation, and turned back to the business section. Evelyn stared at him, guilt pooling in her stomach. What was wrong with her? She had a good life, stability, comfort, a man who provided. She should feel grateful. And yet, her pulse still quickened at the thought of a stranger's gaze in a crowded gallery. That afternoon, Evelyn tried to lose herself in the safety of routine. Laundry folded into neat stacks, counters wiped until they gleamed, letters sorted into tidy piles. But everything felt hollow. The quiet pressed in heavier than ever. On the kitchen counter lay the gallery program Margaret had handed her, its glossy pages filled with images of paintings. Evelyn flipped it open, her fingers trembling slightly as she searched for the name. Clara Mitchell. A small photograph accompanied her biography. The same sharp features, the same air of someone who lived untamed by polite convention. Beneath it, Evelyn read about her travels, her studies in Paris, her work displayed in city galleries. But what struck Evelyn most was the quote printed beneath Clara's name. I paint to free what others bury. Evelyn closed the program quickly, as though someone might see. But her heart thudded against her ribs, because she knew. Clara had already begun unearthing something inside her. 2 days later, Evelyn returned to the gallery. She told herself it was only curiosity. She wanted to see the painting again, the red and gold that had tangled through her chest. The gallery was quieter this time, no crowd, just the echo of her footsteps across polished floors. The canvas was still there, bold and unashamed, drawing her forward. She stood before it, her breath catching. Alone, she could let herself feel the pull without pretense. Back again. The voice was warm, familiar. Evelyn turned, and there she was. Clara, in another paint-smudged shirt, hair loosely tied, eyes amused. Evelyn's cheeks flushed. Yes, I wanted to see it again. Clara stepped closer, folding her arms as she studied Evelyn instead of the painting. Most people look once and move on. You return. That means it's speaking to you. Evelyn swallowed, feeling exposed. It's powerful. Powerful, Clara repeated, as though testing the word. She tilted her head. Or maybe it stirs something you're not ready to name. Evelyn's pulse hammered. Clara's words were too close to the truth. I should go, she murmured, stepping back. But Clara's hand shot out gently, not to hold her, only to rest against the edge of the canvas frame, blocking her retreat. Faye, you don't have to pretend here. Evelyn froze. Their eyes locked again, that same charged current sparking in the air between them. She wanted to speak, to deny, to defend, but instead she found herself whispering, It feels like the painting is alive. Clara's expression softened. That's because it is. It carries everything I couldn't keep inside. Her gaze flicked to Evelyn, steady and knowing. You understand that, don't you? Evelyn's throat tightened. She didn't answer. She couldn't. A silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then Clara smiled faintly and stepped back, breaking the spell. I'm here most afternoons, working in the back studio. If you ever want to see how it's done. The invitation hung between them, weighty, daring. Evelyn nodded too quickly, heart stumbling. Maybe. Maybe, Clara echoed, her smile curving into something unreadable. That evening, Evelyn sat across from Daniel at dinner, pushing food around her plate. He spoke about quarterly reports, about numbers and contracts and things she barely heard. She nodded at the right places, but her mind was elsewhere, in a quiet gallery surrounded by paint and canvas, where a woman with fire in her eyes had looked straight into her soul. When Daniel reached for her hand, she flinched before she could stop herself. He frowned. Tired, she said softly, covering the slip. He accepted the excuse, but Evelyn's chest ached. Something was unraveling inside her. She could no longer pretend the seams of her tidy life were holding. Later that night, lying beside him in the dark, she whispered the truth into the silence, words only the walls would hear. I want more. Evelyn lingered by the window, watching Daniel's car back out of the driveway. He was off early again, briefcase in hand, his eyes already on the day ahead. She waved as always, but the moment the car turned the corner, her hand dropped, and her heart began its restless beating. On the kitchen counter sat the gallery brochure. Clara's photograph stared up at her, that faint smile playing across her lips as though she knew a secret Evelyn didn't dare say aloud. Back in the afternoons, Clara had said, "Come see how it's done." The words had rooted in Evelyn, stubborn and insistent. She told herself she shouldn't go. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself a dozen little lies. And yet, by noon, she found herself in front of the gallery once again, her palms damp against the leather strap of her bag. The front room was quiet, sun spilling across the polished floorboards. Evelyn hesitated, then slipped down the narrow hallway to the back. A faint hum of music drifted from an open door, mingling with the scent of turpentine and oil paint. He paused in the doorway. Clara stood at an easel, brush in hand, her shirt streaked with fresh color, hair falling loose around her face. There was nothing polished or restrained about her. Her movements were free, bold, each stroke alive with energy. Evelyn couldn't look away. Clara turned, catching her in the doorway. For a moment, Evelyn's breath froze. But Clara only smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips. You came. Evelyn managed a small nod. I didn't mean to intrude. You're not intruding. Clara gestured toward a chair in the corner. Sit. Watch if you'd like. Evelyn obeyed, perching on the edge of the seat. She folded her hands tightly in her lap, as though holding herself together. For a while, there was only the sound of brush against canvas, the faint thread of music, the beating of Evelyn's heart. Clara painted with the kind of focus Evelyn had never seen in Daniel, or perhaps in anyone. It was as if the world narrowed to the canvas, every line and color pulled from someplace deep and raw. Evelyn's gaze drifted to Clara's hands, stained with paint, strong yet graceful, moving with certainty. She felt a flush rise in her cheeks and quickly looked away, ashamed of where her thoughts had gone. Clara broke the silence. Do you paint? Evelyn startled. Me? Well, I keep a garden, but that's hardly the same. Clara turned, brush still in hand. It's not so different. You tend the earth, tend the canvas. Both are about creating something alive. The comparison made Evelyn smile faintly. I suppose so. Clara studied her for a long moment, eyes sharp and searching. You look like someone who's forgotten how to create. But you haven't forgotten how to feel. Evelyn's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The words were too close to truths she hadn't dared admit. Clara returned to her painting, leaving the air charged between them. You don't have to explain, she said softly. Sometimes it's enough to just be here. When Evelyn left the studio an hour later, her skin still tingled with the weight of unspoken things. She walked home in the fading afternoon light, the world seeming brighter, sharper, as though Clara's colors had bled into it. But as soon as she stepped into her house, the brightness dulled. The silence was heavy, the rooms neat and lifeless. She made dinner, sat through another one-sided conversation with Daniel about markets and numbers, smiled when he asked if everything was fine. And later, lying awake beside him, she realized the truth. The gallery was no longer just a place she visited. It had become a doorway to something she craved, something she feared, something she could no longer ignore. The following week unfolded in its familiar rhythm. Daniel leaving early, Evelyn tending the house, evenings filled with his talk of business and her polite nods. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. Her thoughts no longer belonged to laundry or errands. They drifted again and again to a sunlit studio, to the scent of turpentine, to a woman whose hands moved like they were painting from the heart of the earth itself. By Thursday, Evelyn didn't bother pretending she was going for a walk or running errands. She simply found herself at the gallery door, almost without conscious choice. Clara was there, as Evelyn had hoped, standing before a half-finished canvas that pulsed with streaks of violet and shadow. She looked up as Evelyn entered, her mouth curving into that easy, knowing smile. "You came back," Evelyn exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. "Ah yes, I wanted to see how it's going." Clara gestured toward the chair again. "Then sit. Watch." And Evelyn did. She sat quietly, as though afraid to break the spell, while Clara worked. She tried not to stare too long at the slope of Clara's neck, the stray curls falling against her cheek, the way paint clung to her wrists like jewelry. But she failed. "Would you like to try?" Clara asked suddenly, holding out the brush. Evelyn blinked. "Me?" Clara's smile deepened. "Why not?" Evelyn hesitated, then rose. The brush felt strange in her hand, awkward, too heavy. Clara moved behind her, guiding her closer to the canvas. Evelyn caught her breath when Clara's hand touched hers, steadying her grip. "Like this," Clara murmured. Her voice was low, close to Evelyn's ear. Together they dragged the brush across the canvas, a streak of color blooming beneath their hands. The touch was brief, practical, and yet Evelyn felt it everywhere, a current rushing beneath her skin. She stepped back quickly, flustered. I don't think I'm any good at this." Clara only tilted her head. "It's not about being good. It's about being honest." The words landed heavily, too close to the ache Evelyn carried. She couldn't meet Clara's eyes. That evening, back in her own kitchen, Evelyn burned the chicken. Daniel barely noticed, too wrapped in his phone and the latest email. When he did look up, it was only to ask, "Everything all right?" "Yes," she said automatically. But the lie caught in her throat. She thought of Clara's hands guiding hers, of the streak of color they had made together, of the way her pulse had raced. No, everything was not all right. And she wasn't sure she wanted it to be. The next afternoon, Evelyn returned. She told herself she wouldn't paint again, wouldn't let Clara too close. But when Clara offered the brush, she took it. And when Clara laughed at her clumsy strokes, Evelyn found herself laughing too, freer than she had in years. Day after day, Evelyn kept returning, drawn like a moth to flame. And though nothing more passed between them than brushes and color, words and glances, the air in the studio grew thick with something unspoken. It was in the way Clara lingered close when correcting Evelyn's grip. The way Evelyn's eyes followed the curve of Clara's wrist. The way silence between them felt charged, as if even breathing carried meaning. By the end of the week, Evelyn could no longer pretend. Something was happening. A line was being drawn, and with each visit, she was stepping closer to crossing it. That night, when Daniel reached for her in bed, Evelyn turned slightly, feigning sleep. His hand lingered on her waist a moment, then withdrew. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart aching with guilt and longing all at once. And in the dark, she admitted what she had feared all along. She didn't want to stop.